Welcome back to the PSTA Podcast. This is Craig King once again. Last week you heard a 2023 legislative forecast or chat with our Director of Governmental Affairs, Patrick Kelly, and he is back to give us a week 3 recap. So I'm going to let him take it away. So Patrick, how you doing?
Doing well. Glad to be here, Craig.
Well, I'm glad to see you made it through this week at the General Assembly.
Yes, it is good to be away from the State House for a few moments. Love being there, but it's been a lot of time over there this week.
Yeah, I bet. So just talk about what happened this week, what teachers need to know about what happened this week, what didn't happen that we thought might have happened. So just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think one thing that I want to emphasize to teachers is one of the most important events in state government that people often don't think a lot about, but it really sets the tone for the legislative session is the governor's annual State of the State address, his kind of version of the State of the Union. And Governor McMaster did that on Wednesday night, and there were some high points for educators, one of which was a PSTA member got recognized by the governor and thanked for her work as a first-year teacher, which was a really cool moment. But the governor's put out his executive budget, and his budget is a proposal. So the General Assembly is not beholden to follow his proposal, but Governor McMaster has been uniquely successful in getting his budget proposal into law during his tenure in office. Some of his predecessors didn't have a real good track record, but he's been pretty successful, and there's some big items in this for teachers that I hope people are going to be paying attention to.
Yeah, and I'll say this. Patrick sent us a picture of his seat, and he was very strategic in how he angled his camera because it made it seem like he was right there on the floor with the governor. But
no, I was way back,
yeah.
way back. But our member did get to sit by the governor's wife during the speech, so they had a fantastic conversation.
Impressive. So we've been seeing a lot of chatter online about ESAs, right? And so talk to us about what the General Assembly did or didn't do this week as it relates to that.
Well, the ESA conversation has been fascinating because typically the House of Representatives is the one that flies out of the gate with legislation. The Senate's slower, more deliberative. But this year has been absolute opposite. The House is being a little bit slower, more deliberative, in large part because about a fifth of their members are brand new, and so they're still getting their feet under them. But the Senate immediately moved, within days, moved their education scholarship account bill to the floor of the Senate for debate. And they today have completed day 6 of debate on that bill, and they still have not voted on it yet. They have gone through, at this point, somewhere in the ballpark of 26 amendments, most of which have been rejected. But the bill as it stands has reverted back to what the Senate passed in 2022 in large part, with a couple of technical amendments that are significant. But at the end of the day, the story here is that it appears the votes are there. On Tuesday, debate has been closed on this bill, so a vote will happen on Tuesday. It's going to pass based on the vote count on the floor, and it's really just a matter of how does it get tweaked on the floor during the last closing moments. Up to 16 amendments can be debated on Tuesday, but no more.
So that means what for teachers? And also, you and I, we know what ESAs are. Most of our listeners probably know what ESAs are, but for the sake that there's someone in Alaska.
Yeah, no, I know our Alaska listening audience is intense, and are they getting daylight right now? I don't even know what time of year. So ESAs are a educational choice vehicle. They're not vouchers in the sense of the traditional state payment to a private school, because that's unconstitutional under our state constitution. That's beyond debate. For the state to directly send money to a private school. So instead, what an ESA program does is it sends money from the state into an account in the name of a student. If the student is eligible and applies, and under the bill on the Senate floor, students are only eligible for an ESA if they live in a Medicaid-eligible household, so it's income eligibility criteria. And if a student applies that's eligible and they receive an ESA, they would receive a $6,000 spending account from the state. And the bill actually identifies 18 different allowable expenses. The big one is tuition to a private school, but it's also tutoring services and computers and transportation and curriculum and all these different things. And it doesn't directly go to the private school because it's going into this account. Now, there's been plenty of debate on the Senate floor that that's still potentially going to fail a constitutional challenge under our state constitution, and even the supporters of the bill have acknowledged that there are questions of constitutionality, but they think that this scholarship account setup where the money's not going directly from the state to the private school and it's funneling through this trust fund account, they think that that's going to get around the state constitution's prohibition on the state providing funds for the direct benefit of a private or religious school.
So, it's safe to say we anticipate this piece of legislation getting somewhere and even getting to the governor's desk, but there will be a challenge at the Supreme Court, you think?
I would think so. The mechanism in this bill is highly similar to in 2020, Governor McMaster tried to use some federal COVID relief dollars to create basically his own executive version of an education scholarship account fund. That was challenged, and it did make it to the state Supreme Court. And in a unanimous decision, the Supreme Court struck down the governor's action 5-0. And all 5 of those justices are still on the Supreme Court. Now, one's going to turn over next week, but that still means 4 of them are there that voted against the governor's program in 2020. And while there are nuanced differences in the two, there's certainly enough similarities that I would think a constitutional challenge is likely. And the supporters of the bill have acknowledged that on the floor during debate.
Anything else from this week that you want to share before we hop off?
Listeners? Two big things. One was in the Senate. The Senate Education Committee had a subcommittee hearing on Tuesday to review 2 pieces of legislation, but one of them addresses a core priority in the PSTA legislative agenda. As all of our listeners, including those in Alaska, know, there are few things less popular with South Carolina educators than Read to Succeed recertification courses.
Amen.
We hear it all the time. The bill that was before the committee, it's a bill introduced by Senator Greg Hembry, the chair of the Education Committee, would effectively eliminate the Read to Succeed course requirement. For middle and high teachers, it would go away completely. For early childhood, elementary, and special ed teachers, including special ed teachers in middle and high school, they would still have to do ongoing literacy training and development, but it wouldn't have to be the 4-course sequence that has been in state statute. It would be a program approved by the State Board of Education that could involve the PD that teachers are already doing through their schools and districts. And it would also have to be provided, anything that's required would have to be provided at no cost to the educator, which has not been the case for a lot of these Read to Succeed courses. People have had to spend a couple $100 on these things. If this bill becomes law, that would go away. It made it out of subcommittee. Now it moves to the full committee. I think its chances there are very good since the author of the bill is also the chair of the full committee. So we're a long way from the governor's desk, but that was an exciting moment. The one other thing that people probably saw in the news is a House Education Subcommittee on Tuesday evening. That's how long a week it's been. On Tuesday evening, they reviewed a bill called the Transparency and Integrity Act. This is the same bill that the House passed last year around issues of curriculum and instructional materials. It fed out of some hearings last year that were around, among different topics, the idea of critical race theory being taught in South Carolina schools. This bill doesn't actually use that language. It has some prohibitions on things that are prohibited instructional topics. It has some protections on things that are protected instructional topics, and most importantly, the fact-based instruction of controversial topics in history. And then it has some processes in place for posting syllabi on learning management systems and districts posting their textbooks and curriculum. And it has a complaint process for a community member that may have concerns about instruction or material or instructional practices. But what I think is notable in this bill is complaints can only be brought by a student, by the parent of a student, or by the employee of a school district. So if you don't fall into those categories, you're not allowed to exercise the provisions of this bill.
Thanks for sharing that, Patrick, and clearing that up, because I think you probably answered a lot of questions that educators or supporters of educators probably have about that legislation, and clearing that up about the process for expressing concern over subject matter being taught. So thank you for joining us again for the PSTA podcast, and we look to have you weekly to give us legislative updates, but talk to the people briefly about how they can, not only through this podcast, but encouraging them to support the other ways that we communicate with them via email? Okay.
Well, so every Friday we send out a Legislative Alert Network email that has a recap of the week as well as a overview of what we know at the time is coming in the week. Now, we don't always know everything. The House Education hearing this week on the Transparency Act was posted on Monday and happened on Tuesday. But I would encourage people to read those emails, and in particular, I always make sure to link directly to the text of any bill that's being discussed. So this Transparency Act is a good example of the importance of reading a bill, because it's really confusing. Last year, there were 5 different bills under consideration, and some of the elements of those bills are in the Transparency Act, but many of those elements are not. There's some language that's similar to a budget proviso that exists right now around instruction and prohibited topics, but not all the language is the same. So one thing that I think people can do is if you've got questions about a bill, of course, reach out and ask us. But read the text of the bill, and if you see something that's concerning, please contact us, because PSTA's goal is to advocate on behalf of the voice of our members. And so if you see something that's a concern or something that's a suggestion, our advocacy efforts are always elevated when we are hearing, getting that feedback from our members that are in the classrooms every single day.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And, members out there, thank you for engaging with the podcast and also with Patrick when he sends out those legislative recaps and updates every week. So make sure you stay engaged. This has been another great episode of the PSTA Podcast, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks, sir.